No?
Śmieszny.
Should we start? Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are on our globe. We welcome everybody who is interested in our event on economic reforms in Belarus. This is a joint event organized by the Center for Social and Economic Research, Case Belarus, and Bruegel think tank. And I have a privilege to host very distinguished speaker, but let me introduce at the very beginning myself. I am Marek Dąbrowski, a fellow at Bruegel and also in this Case Center for Social and Economic Research, the sister organization of the Case Belarus. And my role will be moderating this discussion. We have a panel of 4 distinguished speakers. This is Aleš Alechnovich, the Vice President of Case Belarus, but at the same time also the special representative of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya for economic reforms. Then the next in line to speak will be Anders Oslund, fellow in Atlantic Council in Washington, D.C. He will be followed by Irina Rybakova, Deputy Chief Economist of the Institute of International Finance, also in Washington. So we have to oversee participants. And the last speaker will be Vasilis Maragos, the head of the unit in DG NEAR, the European Commission, Directorate General for Neighborhood and Enlargement Policy. Not to lose too much time, let me just outline the thematic framework of our webinar. We want Belarus became the very hot topics and headlines since August, since the rigged presidential election. And I guess that all of us try to follow current political developments, often very dramatic, very sad from the point of view of international democratic community. But the focus of our today discussion will be largely on economic situation, which is equally dramatic, and this is not novelty. Actually, Belarus was never leader of economic reform. On the contrary, it was for a long time considered as the last enclave of centrally planned command economy on European continent. Since several years, practically almost all previous decade, economy is stagnating. It was very often subject of macroeconomic crisis. And just now, combination of political crisis and COVID-19 pandemic add new challenges to the situation. So we would like to discuss how this economic situation can be diagnosed, what kind of economic reforms should be undertaken in Belarus, and how the international community, especially the European Union, can help Belarus when time for reforms comes. Saying that, I would like to pass the floor to Aleš Alechnovich for making your initial remarks.
Thank you, Marek. Dear ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to give a speech among so many distinguished speakers and guests, and I'm very grateful to Bruegel and to Marek Dąbrowski personally for organizing this event. Let me start from the big picture. Here I will comment on 3 main messages. First of all, over the past 10 years, the Belarusian economy has almost stopped growing. the internal potential of the economy in its current state is very low, and external conditions for Belarus are unfavorable. This includes tax maneuver in Russia, low demand and low prices in energy markets, so for petroleum products, for potash fertilizers, and these are the main export products for Belarus, as well as the impact of global pandemic on the global economy, which led to the recession in Russia. Second message is that economic growth in Belarus is very unsustainable. Short periods of slow economic growth alternate with economic crises. Since 2009, Belarus has experienced 4 such crises. In 2009, it was a 30% devaluation of the Belarusian ruble. Then in 2011, we had a triple devaluation of the Belarusian ruble. There was also currency crisis in the late 2014 and the economic recession in 2015-2016. And the fourth crisis is currently, so the recession this year. Third message is that as a result, since 2009, Belarus has one of the lowest growth rates among almost all 30 post-socialist countries. What is even worse, the Belarusian economy has grown twice as slow as the global economy. So it grows by 1 to 2%, while the global economy is growing or has been growing by 3 to 4%. Moreover, the economic outlook for Belarus remains the worst in the region, even comparing to Ukraine, Russia, obviously to Poland or Lithuania. In October, the IMF forecasted that the average annual GDP growth for the medium-term outlook, so from 2020 to 2024, for 5 years, will be equal to 0.7% on average. And this is 3 times less, for example, than for Poland. Now, let's move to the current state of the economy. Even before the presidential elections, the Belarusian economy entered a recession. Exports of goods dropped by 20% year over year. The ruble depreciated to dollar by 20% year over year. Households were taking their money out of foreign currency deposits, and inflation, on the contrary, exceeded the target of the central bank. After the elections, all these negative processes in the Belarusian economy clearly intensified. The GDP dropped by 1.3% in the first 9 months of this year. It's not that much comparing to other countries, but in Belarus, we didn't have any lockdown. And nevertheless, we still had the recession. The inflation is 6.2% in October, year over year. And according to the governor of the central bank, the inflation is expected to come back to the target of 5% only in the second half of, or even at the end of 2021. The average monthly cost of dollar in October was 26% higher than in October last year. And the deposits in foreign currencies in just 3 months, so in August, September, and October, dropped by 8% or almost $1 billion. However, in case of households, these numbers are even worse. So the private deposits or deposits of households in foreign currencies, they dropped by 17% in just 3 months, or by $1.2 billion. However, also to show another perspective of this, according to the National Bank of Belarus, currently the situation in the financial market is stabilizing. So the outflow of funds from the banking system slowed down. It is still the outflow, but it slowed down in September and October. However, a few days ago, the government, due to political reasons, decided to block banking accounts of around 500, 600 people who received money from the Belarusian diaspora, or in general from different solidarity funds. and the authorities decided, without court legislation or some other needed regulations, decided just to block this money. And in fact, you can even say that they stole this money from people, from private accounts. These transfers, they were absolutely legal previously, so they were in accordance with the Belarusian legislation. So this might actually accelerate the outflow of the private funds from the banking system in November and later on. Exports of goods a little bit improved in October, but still it is over 16% less than a year ago in the first 10 months of this year. The external public debt is amounted to 42% of GDP on 1st July of this year. Together with domestic public debt, it is 50% of GDP, and the general government needs up to $4 billion US dollars per year to service this public debt. And this is very important because currently, due to political reasons, the international financial markets are closed for Belarus. The international financial institutions, or at least the major ones of them, they also stopped any new projects with the state. China is not keen on supporting unstable political regime in Belarus. Only Russia left there to support the regime, but even Russia is far from giving any unconditional funds for the regime. And it's very important because if previously Russia was always ready to support unconditionally the regime, currently it's not true. To sum up, although the situation is not catastrophic yet, the prospects for macroeconomic stability and economic growth are very doomed. And many good things that were done in 2015 to 2019, like reasonable, rational monetary and fiscal policies, and some good institutional changes like introduction of flexible exchange rate regime, in 2020, all these efforts were cancelled out. Based on this assessment, it's my last minute. Based on this assessment of the current situation and the political mandate from Svetlana Tikhanovskaya and the Coordination Council, my role is to create a team of highly qualified economists, of Belarusian economists, who will cooperate also or consult also with foreign economists, international economists. And they should conduct a thorough analysis of the current situation in various sectors and areas of the economy and develop a framework for economic reforms. Having this framework, it's also very important to be in contact, to cooperate with the international financial institutions, with the international organizations and foreign governments to provide financial support for the new democratic Belarus. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex. Before I pass floor to Anders, I would like to make one housekeeping remark. You are welcome to ask question or make comments via Slido, slide.do, hashtag Belarus. This is shown on the event website. And we, in the final part of our webinar, will try to answer some of this question. Now, Anders, please, it's your turn.
Yeah, thank you very much, Marek and Bruegel, for organizing this. And I think that it's very important to look upon the Belarusian economy. And I'll go over pretty much the same things that others did, but I would present the situation as more scary than Alex did. The fundamental problem with the Belarusian economy is that this is an old Soviet economy, as you touched upon in the beginning, Marek, and it has not been reformed other than on the margins. All of the big state companies are still state-owned, and they have not been rationalized. They are heavily subsidized by the state with softer budget constraints. and half a trade is with Russia. Essentially, Belarus economy functions like this. It produces the best Soviet products that ever were produced, and they sell them to one market, to Russia. And Russia in turn sells gas and oil to Belarus, previously on very subsidized prices that has at times gone up to 10% of GDP in Belarus. And then Belarus transforms the gas into fertilizers, and the oil is refined into big refineries. 2/3 of Belarus exports to the West is fertilizers and refined oil. So this is a very, very vulnerable economy, and is fully captured by the Russians. And the economy has been completely stagnant since 2012, as Alice discussed. And the concrete or urgent problem now is the balance of payment. As Alice discussed, it has been ever so often, 4 times in the last 10 plus years. Why? Because Lukashenko thinks that the average wage should be $500 a month, and he doesn't have the money for it because he doesn't develop the economy. And this has really been a problem since 2006. Therefore, the current account deficit is big. Now it's $2.5 billion or so a year, and the cash reserves are down to $3 billion. The total reserves are big, but I don't think they really exist, or they are not liquid at least. So in the next year, Belarus would need $6 billion or so in additional reserves. So where can you get it from? You can get it from 2 sources, either from the IMF with supporting organization, or from Russia. As Alice said, China is not an option. There's no other options. There's no Gulf option or so either that pops up from time to time. The IMF is not an option as long as Lukashenko remains, because the IMF will demand a few things. Free prices, 20% of the prices are still controlled. Privatize big enterprises, that is out of Lukashenko's playbook, and stop state enterprise subsidies. I saw one assessment that it could have been up to 8% of GDP. They are big and should not be. These are essentially the 3 big things. While inflation is not really a big problem, the state budget is not really a big problem. The central bank and the Ministry of Finance and tax system function. So by IMF standards, this is a relatively easy program. But if you have a customer or potential customer who has cheated you when you last did a program in 2009, you're not prepared to do another program with him, and you can't do a program with the opposition leader. It has to be with the government. So the IMF is totally out as long as Lukashenko is there. What is then the alternative? You can say that that is the Armenian model. It is mean debt equity swaps of state companies that are then taken over by Russian private operators and possibly later by the state companies. In a debt equity swap, you typically just get 1/4 of the value. And Russian concrete capitalists are now interested in the 2 big refineries, Naftan and Mosir. Naftan is already to 42.5% owned by state-owned Slavneft. And the other is Belarus Kali, the big asset in the Belarusian economy, that the Russian company Uralkali, controlled by a rather odious character called Dmitry Mazepin, wants to take over. And Belarus Kali produces 1/5 of all potash in the world. This is an enormous asset. And then the other is Grodno Azot, the big fertilizer factory in Belarus. And why would they be sold to Russia? Because Putin will convince Lukashenko that that has to be done, and this will be at the expense of Belarusian people. So I think that the West should here take a firm stand. This must not happen. Sanction any Russian company or capitalist or other organizer who takes over one of these companies, because this would be for nothing. It would be a state monopoly sale organized by Russia to the benefit of one kleptocrat or the other. Apart from Mazepin, the other big operator in the oil sphere is Mikhail Gotseriev, and these are among the most odious big Russian businessmen. And we can see now in Armenia how the country has been completely controlled by big Russian interest, and no other business dares to go into to Armenia today. And this is a way of establishing a kleptocratic model that Belarus has so far avoided. So this is what I see as the big threat. And as long as Lukashenko is there, no reforms are possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anders. Now I would like to ask Elina to present your analysis of the Belarusian economy.
Thank you so much, and it's an honor to be with all the participants here. And I will start from saying something controversial, and also carrying over from Anders and Ales's comments. It is a relatively easy macroeconomic program to fix. So, and of course, Marek, you remember doing that in the 90s. We got a lot of things wrong. I remember being a sort of a small business person and a student then, but we have a lot of experience now how to deal with the economic transformation from the sort of post-Soviet or Soviet economies into the more modern macroeconomic management frameworks, and also structural reforms. So there is, over the last 20 years, there's plenty of experience in various institutions, and Vasilis, of course, will be talking after me about how to do that. So what are the issues? Just to highlight quickly, we have lack of credibility in monetary policy. Therefore, you have a large share of lending and also savings and foreign exchange. Say it's a simple rule of 2/3 usually, or half to 2/3 of lending and deposits is in foreign exchange. Debt is in foreign exchange. And then, of course, whenever happens something to that foreign exchange, you have very large increases in debt and inability of the central bank to be the lender of last resort. Also, when you're borrowing and need to repay very quickly, as Anders also was pointing out, it's also our estimate, you need about 60 billion, which is roughly close to the reserves right now in terms of repayments. So, and that's a very sort of simple macroeconomic problem that can be solved from the macro point of view relatively easily, with improving credibility of the central bank, with transforming the economy from SOEs more to the private sector, and then also, of course, diversifying exports. And Anders also talked at length about it. I'm not going to repeat it. The cycles that we have seen is usually sort of a string that comes from Russia, and it gives a subsidy, and then it takes us away, and then it gives a subsidy again, and then it takes us away again. And it's a sort of a very difficult relationship over the last 20 years that hasn't helped transform Belarusian economy, because it helps it rely on the subsidy, and then sort of tempts it into the reliance on the subsidy, and then of course structurally it prevents the economy from transforming into a more progressive business model or economic model. So on the positive side, however, and we haven't mentioned that yet, we have a lively growing SME sector there, highly competitive. It is the IT sector. We've seen still relatively strong wage growth there. We've seen strong export also of services from there. And we have seen a massive increase in contribution to employment from that sector, as well as increase to contribution to GDP. This is something that we didn't have in a lot of economies in the Soviet space when they were beginning to transform. It was very unclear where they will find their competitive edge. In the case of Belarus, we already see that, and it's a sector that can work. We've also seen increase in investment, of course, up until the recent events. We've seen increase in FDI. Of course, FDI is to 40% is from Russia, and it's a tricky one. But nonetheless, we've also seen some increase in FDI in other sectors of the economy. Again, which could give us an indication where Belarus could be competitive going forward. And then finally, on the relationship with Russia and the EU, we have seen similar stories in Ukraine, where the reliance can be changed. But I think in the case of Belarus, it's also much more nuanced relationship. And while you cannot lift up a country and walk away from your neighbors, you probably have to find a way to sort of work smoothly to the extent possible to all your neighbors. And of course, diversifying exports is possible. Belarus already exports a big chunk of goods to Europe. Of course, these are still very primary goods. These are not high value added goods. There's a lot of agricultural commodities. But even there, just comparing quickly to Ukraine, Ukraine struggled in the beginning because it didn't have the right safety standards for exports to Europe of agricultural products. In Belarus, there is already some progress on that front as well. So there is a lot of potential. We know which direction to move. The question, of course, is how to start doing that, and that's a political debate that we're not having here, but everybody's following online, I'm sure. Thank you so much, Marek, and I'll pass the floor.
Thanks, Elina. Now I would like to ask Vasilis Maragos to make his statement.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It is really very timely to discuss about Belarus, and in particular with a focus on the economic situation today, because the economic situation is, and we will discuss about this. I will make some comments on this in a moment. Is very much linked with the political situation, and I think it was mentioned that was the underlying feature of the previous presentation in particular. And I don't think that we can delink the economy from politics. Actually, one of the reasons why we didn't have reforms in the past, and we had tried, and I will mention this in a moment, we had tried to support some reforms, at least some opening in Belarus in the past period, but this did not work because, in my opinion, we didn't have the right political approach to that. Let me just recall very briefly what is the EU position regarding the developments of in Belarus since the August falsified presidential elections. First of all, we have adopted sanctions. We should not forget about that. And these sanctions actually are addressing mainly individuals, including, by the way, Alexander Lukashenko and other high-ranking officials, because of their involvement and their responsibility when it comes to the repression, the violence, but also the falsification of the elections. This is, I think, an important element which defines our relationship with the country right now. Secondly, we have called on the Belarusian authorities, and I think there is space, there was space for that, and there is space. But we have called to the authorities to seek a peaceful and democratic solution to the crisis through an inclusive national dialogue, including, by the way, with the Coordination Council. I think it is an important position, and it is also part of our approach that the solution has to be found within Belarus. So strengthening, in particular, Belarus' sovereignty and independence. Then we have strengthened our engagement with the Belarusian people and the civil society, and we are recalibrating our assistance to make sure that it reaches the people of Belarus. It's going to be challenging, clearly, but on the other side, I think it is important to note our openness to support the people. and we have also prepared elements for short-term support. We have already provided some support as a response to the violence, but mainly now we would like to increase our support to the civil society, to health. Let's not forget that there is an ongoing health challenge related to COVID, to SMEs, because we believe that the SME sector, it was not mentioned earlier, and I think it is correct because the macroeconomic impact of the SME sector has not been so important, but it has helped, first of all, to create channels for the expression of the talent of the Belarusian people and the Belarusian experts. I think we should not forget about that. And actually, this is what may be also the future response to following a democratic transition, to making sure that Belarus becomes a prosperous state, because this is what the people of Belarus expect. And finally, we are also reviewing, I think I mentioned already this, reviewing the Belarus relations with the European Union. And there, of course, we will see, probably you have seen that there were council conclusions a month ago on the 12th of October, and we base ourselves on this. In the past, since the opening in the relationship in 2016, we have started to support certain strategic reforms in Belarus. These reforms did not materialize, but there was an interest, there was an engagement, and we have targeted in particular with our portfolio some actions towards the strategic modernization of the Belarusian economy through reforms of the state-owned enterprises. You remember when there was the negotiation with the IMF, which did not materialize a couple of years ago, did not result in a program, that one of the key priorities was the state-owned enterprises. And actually, we continue to see that the state-owned enterprises continue not to be rational. They create, of course, a lot of added value. It was mentioned, some of them were mentioned earlier. But on the other side, they create also a big burden to the economy. And I recall our discussions with the IMF at the time to see how, what type of hidden state aids existed actually to these state-owned enterprises, and what was the fiscal impact of the state-owned enterprises. To my knowledge, this work has not been finalized. And when it comes to the future reforms following democratic transition, I think that this is a painful, very difficult, because employment is linked with that, but on the other side, an important part of such reforms, I would say. So just to complete this part, we worked with the World Bank on a comprehensive roadmap also for structural reforms. This has been an element which on which we had a lot of exchanges with the authorities. I think there was an interest, but finally it was not followed up by the government. So I think it's important to go back to this comprehensive roadmap for structural reforms to see the elements which need to be taken into account in the future. And then we have been supporting, and we continue to support, and I would like to hear also from our distinguished participants in the panel how they see that. Under the strengthening of the private initiative growth in Belarus since 2016, but this is actually for us an allocation here. These are projects which have been implemented following financing agreement signature rather later, almost 2 years later. So we have been mainly working with the EBRD, advice to small businesses, co-financing grants to local SMEs to make them more competitive. And this is a very important contribution which has helped a lot in the past period, but also working through local banks to provide easier loans to SMEs. We also supported through the Women in Business program, support to businesses, small and medium-sized enterprises, to strengthen, let's say, female entrepreneurship, because actually you find a lot of talent there and new skills which are very, very important for the competitiveness of this part of the economy. And we have also worked with the IFC on creating again regulatory reform conditions to boost the country's private sector growth, but the results of this are extremely limited. We have also worked, just to be complete, with the National Bank of Belarus through an innovative, in the case of Belarus, arrangement, the first twinning we had, and we had actually Poland and Lithuania participating in this twinning. And actually the results of these were very good, because I think that also in the National Bank, Belarus has excellent experts who can help also in the future. Now, the European Council has asked the European Commission to prepare a comprehensive plan for economic support to future democratic Belarus following the transition. And the work is ongoing, I have to say, on this. But of course, it will depend, the final shape of this plan will depend on the quality of democratic transition. But if we assume that things will go as the people of Belarus expect, then we believe that we will be able to support the country's reforms. So very, very important to have a dialogue on all these reforms. And of course, we'll do whatever we will do with after a dialogue with the authorities. And so we will support in this way the transition, the economic transition, but we are ready, of course, to support the social part of this transition. And then, of course, we are ready to upgrade sectoral cooperation and policy dialogue. But most importantly, we are ready to work together with the IMF in case there is, let's say, a framework which is conducive to that, so that we can support the country's financing needs. So what we heard a couple of minutes ago about the balance of payments, significant challenges which will be faced. Now, if we are also moving towards, and it depends also on the time, if we are moving towards a green recovery post-COVID, we are also going to be able to use the various other means that we are using in the region to support the country. Just to recall that before the elections, we were in discussions with the government, but these discussions did not finalize to support a COVID resilience program. This is something which, of course, we are ready to discuss with the democratic government once hopefully this transition takes place. Just to complete from my side, we believe that we are ready to continue engaging with Belarus. We are supporting as much as it is possible in the current circumstances the Belarusian people, the Belarusian civil society, exchanges between people, youth, scholarships. We are supporting the small and medium-sized enterprises, as I mentioned. But most importantly, we are ready, as we are doing in the rest of the region, through our proposals to focus on resilience. We are ready to engage with the government of the country following democratic transition in order to see how we can strengthen the country's resilience, stability, but also the capacity and the prospects for growth, for sustainable growth, for a prosperous country with prosperous citizens. Of course, there are challenges, and there are going to be challenges. I don't think that there is experience, as it was mentioned earlier, that can be used, but there are also lessons learned that can be used from the long transition of other countries post-Soviet, from the post-Soviet space in Central and Eastern Europe. But on the other side, I'm confident that Belarus has an excellent material. I recall what I said about the people, the talent, the capacities of the people, an administration which can also be efficient, hopefully also under democratic circumstances. And I think that based on that and strengthening further the country's independence, sovereignty, capacity to decide about its own future, we are ready to further engage and to strengthen that process. Thank you very much, and looking forward to our further engagement during the call today, but also later. Thank you for organizing this.
Thank you very much, Vasilis. Now it's time for Q&A session. And we have a couple of questions which came. Let me start from detailed specific question. One of them put by Julia or Julia, depending on what language we spell, is for Aleś. Some information in media suggests that the state is currently negotiating new funding from EU banks. To what extent this information is confirmed? Please, Aleś.
Yes, thank you for the question. I've also read this news. I don't know more details than what was mentioned by the Ministry of Finance in Belarus. I don't know exactly the amount of this financing and the counterparts. I mean, what foreign banks are going to cooperate with the Belarusian banks. So I cannot comment on this. I don't have any insider information there.
Anders?
Yeah, Marek, let me also comment here on what Vasilis Maragos said. All this is very good. I'm in favor of it, but nothing major can be done, and nothing can be done about financing without Lukashenko. And that's what the IMF has encountered time and time again. So the strange thing with Lukashenko's administration is that he allows competent people at high levels in the government, and they can do good reforms, but it cannot be done when it comes to the top level. And this concerns financing. So without knowing anything about it, I can say that there are only two banks that can be in question, Sberbank and VTB. It can only be the biggest Russian state banks. Nobody else is possible. I don't think even that a Chinese state bank can be possible. I don't think that any Gulf bank can be possible, even if there would be a marginal possibility of that.
Okay, anybody else would like answer this question? Alina, please.
Well, what we have seen in previous shocks is that, first of all, the Sberbank, VTB, VEB maybe will react, and then the foreign banks will sort of trade with them, will gradually enter via products that they might be offering. So in this case, we've seen news reports, supposedly Russian banks extending fresh money. But judging also by the previous crisis, it's highly unlikely that a foreign bank will move before stabilization, before comfort from the state control, from the Russian state-controlled banks, and then stabilization in the domestic situation. So I think it's very hard for me, of course, to imagine that scenario. And then the second one, also carrying over what my colleague said, is yes, we've seen a lot of technocratic people in various parts of the government over the last 15 years. But the problem there is always rotation. You know, you will have this very good, serious people coming in, trying maybe do change on the margin, but they will disappear a year or two later. And this sort of musical chairs in the institutions are, of course, not productive, in addition to the elephant in the room that is politics.
Thank you. The same person asked, should sectoral sanctions specifically against oil trading companies be considered as an option to put more pressure on the regime? Who would like to answer this question? Please, Anders, yeah.
I'm happy to answer that. I'm strongly against sectoral sanctions against Belarus. And the reason is that you should not punish Belarus, you should punish the aggressor. The aggressor is Russia. So you should punish Russian oligarchs or Russian companies that try to take over Belarusian companies. The US has still, I think it's 9 companies that are sanctioned, but these sanctions are not active but waived for the time being. And it's, for example, Naftan oil refinery, because Russia has got 42.5% ownership in it. I think this is all wrong. We want Belarus to be integrated with the West rather than with Russia. Then we should sanction nothing in Belarus. Instead, I'm in favor of massive sanctions on individuals in Belarus, because these are people who have committed serious human rights crimes, and they should be punished. The best is through personal sanctions, that a deterrent for the punishment for them and a deterrent for others to continue to support Lukashenko. Thank you.
Thank you. Now let's move to more, I would say, fundamental questions. Christopher Hartwell is asking, how do the panelists see the fact that Belarus is firmly situated in the Eurasian Union as a challenge or opportunity for the reforms going forward? Who would like?
Elena.
Yeah, maybe I'll just start. I think it's a fantastic opportunity. I think it is. We live in a new geopolitical world, and even Vasilis in the Commission, it's all geopolitical there. So one cannot pretend that you can just have economics on one side and politics on the other. And I think location-wise and the relationship-wise, Belarus does have a strong advantage that it sort of gets along with everybody in the region very well, and is already having trade relationships with everybody in the region. So if it can determine its own path much more forcefully from the economic point of view, was discussing about economics here, it can benefit from both. And we have seen when you're improving your standards in order to be able to sell products to the EU according to the European quality standards, then you also get orders from Middle East or from Asia, or also possibly more from Russia, because the products are just better quality. So there is also this positive spillover effect. So one doesn't have to choose one or the other, as long as you're removing this sort of leash of subsidy that Belarus gets jerked on with the Russian subsidy on oil.
Yes, sorry, I need to disagree here. I think that the Russian form of integration is very bad as it is. It's really to let state companies and kleptocrats take over. It's a monopolistic form. Armenia is a good example of this. You have essentially two big foreign companies in Armenia, Pernod Ricard and HSBC. For the rest, it's only Russian companies. And for example, Gazprom has taken over the whole gas sector and does not allow any purchases of gas from anybody but Gazprom in Russia, while Iran offers much cheaper gas. This is how Russia does business in reality. And the Eurasian Economic Union is a joke as a customs union. Nothing there hangs together. It does not have a common customs system, and leads naturally to massive smuggling of everything that is not there. Belarus has benefited greatly from being a transit area between Ukraine and Belarus, and is now the fourth biggest trading partner of Ukraine. And Belarus is traditionally a very honest country. I was in Belarus the first time in 1986, and I was stunned that people even refused to take tips. I didn't encounter that anywhere else in the former Soviet Union. And it's really a choice between Western rule of law and Russian kleptocracy and corruption. And that's unfortunately how we need to see it. If Russia changes, that Putin goes, then it's a different world, but we are not there yet.
Thank you, Anders. Aleš?
Yes, I would like to comment on this. First of all, I would like to say firmly that there is no geopolitical shift in the agenda of the democratic coalition. So there is no questions about joining the West or joining Russia. And the surveys show that the vast majority, or at least the majority of Belarusians, would prefer to keep the independence of Belarus and to have a good economic relationship with both Russia and the West. So this is the will of the people. Technically, since Belarus is in the Eurasian Economic Union, it cannot sign any new free trade agreement in goods without political decision of the whole Eurasian Union, but it can individually sign free trade agreements in services. So probably this is one of the way how it's possible to work with easing tariff regulations, non-tariff barriers between Belarus and the international community. Perhaps there is also a possibility of unilateral way of easing the barriers, for example, in the EU, because Belarus cannot do it without the political decision of all other countries in the Eurasian Union. And this is very important to diversify the Belarusian exports and to bring more resilience here.
Thank you. Let's
Marek, I want also to make a comment on this.
Sure, please.
Yeah, just to say that I listened very carefully to these positions. Just to clarify as well that the European Union, as Alice also was saying, we have never asked the Belarusian people to make a choice, a geopolitical choice. Actually, our geopolitical, if you like, approach is that the people have to be free to decide for themselves. So this is a very, very important point. And we are ready to engage with democratic Belarus, no matter what is the decision which will be taken. And of course, to use some opportunities which may exist for the country when it comes to the Eurasian Economic Union. But there, I personally doubt, as Anders has said, I have also some doubts about this particular integration scheme. There are a lot of question marks, and I think that it is important to take this into account. On the other side, when it comes to the EU, I think the idea of having more openness when it comes to services is an interesting one. By the way, our agreement with Armenia also has elements of that, in particular in the digital sphere. So I think we are ready to discuss all the options. On the other side, the issue of the standards is essential. And I think a comprehensive program of investment, in particular in food security, may allow for increase of the exports of Belarusian products to the European Union. I think this requires some investment in infrastructure, in legislation, but also in the administrative capacity and then the administrative infrastructure which is needed in order to interact, in particular in the meat area, which is a very sensitive one for the European Union markets. But this is something that we are ready to consider when it comes to new democratic Belarus, and of course we are open to all the options which may exist there.
Thank you very much, and perhaps last question which we managed to answer, this question of Mirko. What about the manufacturing base in Belarus, for example, tractor production? In case of trade liberalization, is there potential for outsourcing from Europe? I understand that this question about whether European firms can outsource from Belarusian producers. Who would like to answer this question?
Can I try, Marek? Just to say that, of course, we are ready. As I said before, I mentioned the meat sector, but this can be actually, this applies to many sectors. Of course, we have the IT sector, which is key, and I really think that there the potential and the competitiveness is at the top level. But of course, we are ready to consider further interaction in the automotive sector, which is also another big potential. Now, this being said, of course, when you participate in another free trade area with customs rules which you may not control, for instance, Belarus does not fully control, etc., then this is an additional burden, let's say. So we are not 100% sure what will be the interest of the EU companies to outsource under these conditions. But on the other side, we are ready to explore that. We are ready to discuss it. And here I think it was not mentioned, but I would like just to mention that as Belarus is not a member of the WTO, for us it is essential that this process of negotiation for accession is finalized as soon as possible with new dynamism. There was a process, there is a process. We have been supporting this process, but this process has not been conclusive. So in order to facilitate the integration of Belarus into the international markets, I think we need to focus on that part first.
Okay, both Ales and Anders wanted to say something, and this will be our last intervention. Sorry, because our time is going.
Yeah, so very briefly, in Belarus, there is huge potential to optimize the state-owned enterprise sectors, including the big manufacturing companies. And there is also good potential for joining the global value chains by these companies. There were at least several researches made by, for example, the World Bank, which showed that for the Belarusian big manufacturers, it's incredibly important to focus, to specialize in certain parts of the production cycle, instead of trying to do the whole, car, the whole tractor, combine, and etc. So it's still possible to cooperate with Russian, with Polish, with some other Germany manufacturers, and to build joint ventures there, to be counterparts. So.
Thank you. Anders, last.
Yeah. Seeing the protests in the big factories in Belarus, this looked very much like Poland 1980, very much because these are big state companies that have not been rationalized. The workers have an old pride, which has disappeared otherwise. The Minsk tractor factory used to be the best out of 13 in the Soviet Union. It certainly still is, but that is not good enough. So what we have seen in Central Europe that the automotive companies have developed enormously, but with the exception of Skoda, it has essentially been new factories with old workers that have developed. And we are all even now seeing in Western Ukraine that car parts companies are developing very far. So what I would expect is to see Western companies coming in, typically German and Japanese car part companies first, developing new factories. New factories look like warehouses and not like the old factories anywhere. And the old workers will come in there from the other factories, and then soon afterwards we will get the car assembly, and then we will get car factories. So I think that Vasilis made a very important point here, that Belarus needs to enter the WTO as soon as possible, which should not be problematic to get it done if there is a will. So this is an opportunity in the medium term. In the short term, it will be quite problematic because we should not expect these tractor and truck factories to survive in the short term. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we have approached the end of our time limit. I would also like to say that there were few questions and comments which doubted whether economic reform have chance before political reform started. I think that all of us answered this question in more or less straightforward way. I also joined the opinion, which, for example, was expressed by Anders, that without political changes, we cannot hope for starting genuine economic reforms. I would like to thank all of you for participating in this, I think, very interesting and fruitful discussion. And I can only declare on behalf of Bruegel and I also on behalf of Case Network that we'll continue to watch situation, economic situation and political situation in Belarus, and we continue our work and discussion on how Belarus should go out from the current problems. And referring to initial statement of Aleš, we are also ready to, non-Belarusian participants to support effort of independent Belarusian economists to draft economic program for this country. Thank you very much once again, and I'm very happy that we were together.